So, we have a big one today. A big one that I took a bunch of notes on. We're going to be talking about Wendigos for our creature feature. And it's Halloween season, so of course we're going to be doing monsters. So, Wendigos have many names. Some variation of Wendigo, all kinds of nuances. But the general translation of it is, I had two that I found. One was the evil spirit that devours, and the other is, and I quote, cannibal demon of the northern woods. Now, out of everything that I found, there's a little bit of discrepancy on whether a Wendigo is in fact a spirit or in fact a physical being. Now, the two versions of it is it can either be a spirit that possesses a person, or it can be a person that has been corrupted. But there's a little bit of allusion to this, so I'm going to read some of my notes, so hopefully it'll make sense. Now, the general consensus, though, is a Wendigo is created when a human consumes the flesh of another human. And one of the theories was that it brings out a darkness within that person that kind of like corrupts their spirit into a Wendigo spirit. So I'm gonna, because there is an origin story for the first one. According to tradition, the Wendigo was once a warrior respected by his people. Then, after a battle against tribal enemies, he showed his contempt for the fallen enemy by cutting off their flesh and consuming it. He was found several days later, still eating the flesh of his enemies. His people, his elders and such, warned him to stop, but he ignored these warnings and began to prey upon people of neighboring tribes. Driven away from the fires of all the other tribes, the Wendigo prowls the forests and frozen wastes of northern America, always starving for human flesh. Now, a lot of this came from a book called Indian Myths. It was published in 1884. I found this book. I found this very old book. And it had some really interesting stuff in it. And I downloaded the PDF. It's free archive online. If you are interested in this, hit me up. But she's a beast. She is a 700-page book. But that's where a lot of this came from. Now, there, as in all of the research that I was doing, there was one thing that was very specific. I don't know where this idea of the zombie deer Wendigo came from, because I could not find that in any of the lore. So just like everything else, like skinwalkers and werewolves and vampires, I believe that this is a media corruption of something to make it scarier. So let's get into that. So I found a description, and it was explained by a man named Basil Johnston. He was a scholar, he was a writer, the man was part of cultural immersion, which, if you don't know what that means, is basically these people try to bring back the old ways and educate people on them. That way our ways don't die out. And this was his explanation, and I found the book. It was the Manitous. I'm going to drop a link in the description box. You can find it on Amazon. This is description. The Wendigo was gaunt to the point of emaciation. Its desiccated skin pulled tightly over its bones, with its bones pushing out against its skin. Its complexion the ash gray of death, and its eyes pushed back deep into their sockets. The Wendigo looked like a gaunt skeleton recently disinterred from the grave. What lips it had were tattered and bloody, and it gave off a strange and eerie odor of decay and decomposition, of death and corruption. So, nowhere in that scary zombie deer. Now, one thing that was very consistent in it is that they were giants. or standing of a tall stature. Sometimes it's 7 feet, sometimes it's 15. It depends on where you're getting your information. But the general consensus is they were giant things, whether it be spirit or individual. Now, part of this, I'm going to see if I can find it because I thought I wrote it down, but kind of looking like, oh yeah. So I missed a part in our story. That's very important. After a time, the Master of Life decreed that if the warrior chose to live like a monster, he would appear as one, and the warrior was transformed. Now, why is that relevant? Because obviously this person started out looking human, and it was through the greed and corruption and ravenous hunger that it was turned into a monster via curse. Now, there is another story that we know of that's pretty popular about cannibalism and transformation, and that would be the story of Lycaon. Now, if you're not familiar, Lycaon was a king who tried to trick Zeus and Hermes, I believe it was. The stories vary. But the gist of it was he tried to serve them the flesh of a servant. Sometimes it's a child. It again varies. But it was an act of cannibalism to see if they really were who they said they were. And of course, Zeus being offended by this, he turns him into the werewolf monster. Assuming you want to consider it a werewolf, it's hit and miss. But neither here nor there. The point is we have consistency, and there was a few others that I found not quite as spot on. But the gist is these people, through arrogance and hubris, ate the flesh of others. Powers on high was like, you know what? No. And turned them into monsters. Now, for as far as the people who get possessed by this spirit goes, it typically is attracted to people that are like extremely greedy and gluttonous and, just all around sucky. So now there is actually a movie that touches on this in a very vague way. Well, not really vague because the whole movie's about it, but they don't full-blown turn into monsters. The score on this movie is terrible and campy, I will tell you now. But there was a movie that came out called Ravenous, and if I remember correctly, it had what's his name? Guy Pearce, I think, the one that was married to Madonna. Anyway, it's got him in it. And I mean, if you can ignore the horrible music, because it was a heavy miss, but the story itself is very interesting, albeit a little campy because it is an older movie, not like older black and white movie, obviously, but I do recommend it if you're interested. And it really gets into this whole, as soon as you taste the flesh of man, you go batshit, basically. So, now, let's talk about some general logic behind this. Now, I know Wendigos are a hot topic, and people are like, oh, I saw a Wendigo. Oh, I heard a Wendigo. Oh, there was a Wendigo sighting. These are specifically in that northwest to mid-north range, like the Ontario to Washington type of area. And I believe there was also allegedly Minnesota area, so you get the gist. So if you're gonna hit the middle mark of the United States and then on the Canada border and then just right across towards Washington state, you get a gist of this thing's territory. Now, from what I can tell from the lore and the documentation, is these are specifically in the north. So, are we gonna see them in Alabama? Probably not. And are we going to see them in Nevada? Probably not. Because it seems like this thing's preferred hunting ground is mountainous woods anyway. And, I mean, it starts to lead a lot of these stories into skepticism, which they should be anyway. But when you have all these stories of these people that allegedly saw one, And then they're describing it as our zombie deer. And I'm just going to keep calling it zombie deer because that's how people describe it. Oh, it's rotten and it's got deer head. And I mean, like, I was always skeptical about that, but I was open-minded to it. But I mean, yeah, none of any kind of like actual documentation. Obviously, I was digging deep for this. None of this like modern paranormal cryptid or anything like that, which I don't really give much credit to anyway. Skinwalker video was very clear to that. If you've not seen the Skinwalker video, I highly recommend it. It's on the creature feature list. Have at it. But yeah, so giant evil cannibal spirit. And it's actually not that and Lycaon are not the first time we've heard of giant cannibals either, because pretty specifically, Titans like to snack on people. And if I recall correctly, I do believe the Cyclopses and stuff like that fell into that category of Titans mixing with something. I don't remember which. I'm a little rusty. But I mean, giant snacking on people is a pretty common lore. So, I mean, maybe this was our American version of these. And, I mean, it would make sense because it kind of, universal truths and all that. And I believe another one that we actually have a couple other giant type figures in Native American lore, one of which is the stone men or stone giants, which I think snacked on people. And then there was also the moon-eyed people, which were an actual people, but there's a lot of debate on what they actually were, whether they were just Europeans that came over ahead of everybody else or what. But neither here nor there. Big giant monster things that eat people and we don't mess with. And I never really cared for people under the idea like, oh, there's a Wendigo spirit in me. No. Because if that were true, you wouldn't be telling me that. Because I highly doubt any of the people claiming that has the willpower or know how to thwart such a thing. So, but I mean, that's the gist of it. That's everything I could drudge up on Wendigos that was, based in some actual study. And, and I mean, this stuff was well documented too. Like, as far as like, these are people that are renowned in their field that did the proper research, not some crazy ghost hunters that are running around out in the woods and, with the bad night vision going, what's that? And then deer zombies. But yeah, I hope you all like this. And as always, if you like my videos, hit the like button. If you like my channel, hit subscribe. I upload every Monday now. By all means, if you have a request, give me a request. I like them. I reply to comments. Hit me up. I am always available. And I absolutely like doing this research when y'all have questions and stuff. It just gives me more content. So yeah, hit subscribe. I hope you liked the video. Leave comments.